Welcome to everyone. Welcome to all of you who are on the live call. Welcome to all of you in the future who are watching this on the replay. And so let me give you a quick overview of our agenda. We have 2 hours, and the first part is going to be lecture and some images, and we will weave in some meditation time, so make yourselves comfortable. And then somewhere around the end of the first hour, we will have a short 2-minute commercial break for my new course. And then we're going to go immediately back to more studies and practice. But we will be using the outline of the course, the new content that we'll be talking about, as more teachings. Now, a lot of the questions that came in are going to be answered as we go along. What we're going to be focusing on here for the first part is really about the origin of the chakra systems, and that's going to answer a lot about where are they, how many are there, what do we do with them, and all of this. So to start, I wanted to let you know what my motivation is, why would I want to talk about this subject. Well, this is closely related to my background in classical Asian medicine. And in classical Asian medicine, one of the things that we find is that these lineages, Chinese medicine, Tibetan medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, these lineages are inseparable from the spiritual lineages. They're inseparable from the lineages of meditation, tantra. And so we see in Chinese medicine a very close relationship with Qigong and Taoism and Taoist alchemy. And in Ayurvedic medicine, we find a very close relationship with the Vedas, of course, and with tantric practices. And with Tibetan medicine, we also find the same thing, that there is a very close relationship to Buddhist meditation practice and Tibetan Buddhist Tantra. And so these 3 medical traditions are actually where I first encountered these teachings about the chakras, because they're inseparable. Now, my motivation is really because I was so fortunate. I was fortunate to meet many teachers of classical Asian medicine and many true teachers who became what I would consider holy people, highly accomplished practitioners of meditation, such as one of my earliest influences, Kalu Rinpoche the Elder, who practiced in the Himalayas in the tradition of Milarepa. People would find him meditating in caves in the middle of the winter with just a cotton cloth. And the ability to do that was based on the knowledge of how to control physiology, which was based on the knowledge of how to work with the chakras at a very deep level. So I consider myself extremely fortunate to have come into contact with genuine lineages and to have met people who were genuine practitioners of those lineages. So this is very different than what a lot of people have encountered when it comes to these systems. And what is known now about the chakras is really fairly recent in our culture. And a lot of it is now extremely popular, and it is exploding in interest. But it's the same phenomena as with herbal medicine. From my perspective, what I see, having met these teachers and doctors and herbalists and meditators and yogis in their original environment in the Himalayas many decades ago, what I have found is that a lot of the knowledge that is being made available now is very superficial. All right, I'll just put it that way, superficial compared to what is available to us and what has been available in these cultures. Now, the reason that I say this about the chakra system is the same reason I say it about herbal medicine. You see, because herbal medicine now is also undergoing the same process. Now, herbal medicine, the counterpart here with herbal medicine is that something like adaptogens are now extremely well known, and that's the positive side of all of this. So adaptogens are trendy. Everybody knows about adaptogens now. But what's missing is the context of how do we use adaptogens according to the individual and what are things that we mix them with. And so therefore, what we're losing, at least in this introductory level that we're getting now through popular culture and social media, what we're losing is the real depth and the complexity of everything from the Chinese formulas that go back, say, 1,500 years. There's incredible knowledge that are in these formulas, incredible insights that are in these formulas, and incredible insights that are in these practices. So this is my motivation. I have had very good fortune, and my motivation is to simply share that so that we can have a broader, a deeper, a more historical perspective on what the chakras are and link it back to herbal medicine. So that's also part of what we'll be doing here, is talking about how we can use the chakras in conjunction with herbs and oils and how they can be used for healing and what they do and what they don't do, and how we sort out some of the issues about when we think in terms of chakras and when we don't. Okay, maybe sometimes we need to think in terms of blood tests as opposed to chakra diagnosis. So I'm presenting information from my own studies and practice. And this is something that, again, I've been very fortunate because in knowing this historical background, I've been very interested in what are the scholars, what are the academics, the translators doing these days? And we are actually in a golden age of opportunity to study this subject because many of the root texts that were written in Tibet 1,000 years ago are now being translated. And that's where I would like to take us in this short presentation, is back to some of this original knowledge and put everything into perspective here. So let's start here with a definition of our title, The Flowers of Immortality. Okay, well, that sounds pretty substantial here. What do we mean, Flowers of Immortality? And so let's start with, well, the whole title is Exploring the Body's Inner Landscape of Chakras, Deities, and Cosmological Powers. Well, there's a lot there. And just that tells us there's a lot more to chakras than maybe we originally thought about. So, flowers, immortality, inner landscape, deities, cosmological intelligence. Obviously, we're going to be touching on a lot of things. So let's start with flowers. Why flowers? And why immortality? So the simple way that we can understand this is that originally, for centuries and centuries, the chakras have been described as flowers, actually. And we can see this in the classical iconography of petals. And flowers open and close. Now, what makes them open and close? That's one of the most basic questions that everybody's asking in different ways. So we can see this imagery of flowers opening and closing, and that is symbolic, all right? There are not literally parts of the body that open and close like this, or maybe there are, okay? And that's one of the most fundamental teachings about what we're doing here. And that is that they blossom under the influence of our attention. All right, so that's the key. Our attention is energy. Our mind is energy, and our attention is focused energy. And so we could say it is the prana of attention. And when we put the prana of attention into the inner landscape of the body, then the subtle energy of the nervous system begins to respond. And so what that tells us is that if we focus our minds inwardly, that we can create physiological changes, and that these physiological changes also can be used to support transformation in our consciousness. That's the simplest explanation of opening and closing. We could say that if a chakra is responding, it means we're paying attention to it. That's one definition. There's many, many systems of chakras and many definitions. But now, why immortality? That's a pretty big claim. Why immortality? Doesn't mean that we're actually going to live forever if we do this. No, obviously not. Otherwise, those yogis from 1,000 years ago would still be here. But what it means is that in our ordinary consciousness, the way that we experience the body is mostly relatively superficial. And mostly what we're noticing is fairly strong physiological sensations that are accompanying these various mental states and emotional states that are arising and dissolving. That's how we get our sense of who we are. That's how I feel like I am this particular person, my body sensations, my mental states, and my emotional states. But in reality, if we look a little bit deeper, and this is one of the meanings of the chakra system, is these depictions of the chakras are telling us that we are actually incarnated into a container that contains the entire universe. And all of the chakras and their associations with elements and with deities are basically telling us the inside of the body is actually the cosmos. And so therefore, if we go into the landscape, the inner landscape of the body, and we start focusing on it, what we discover is that we are inhabiting this container of energies and elements that are representations and activity of cosmological intelligence created the entire universe. That's what is happening now in the body. And that is also specifically the biology of the body, because that intelligence is in the biosphere of the elements. And this is a clear link now between classical chakra systems and the deities that represent the cosmology of the universe in the microcosm of the body, and a clear link with the 5 elements of the classical tantric and Ayurvedic systems, earth, air, fire, water, space, that are depicted in being the various chakras. So in other words, when we look at the chakra depictions, what we're really talking about is we're talking about how to see the entire universe inside of ourselves. And that doesn't include just the biospheric elements. That also includes our consciousness. And so therefore, what we can say is that the chakra system is showing us the presence of the entire universe at the physical level, but it's also showing us the presence of the entire human psyche at the mental level. So the deities are also representations of our own mind, representations symbolically of the powers of nature inside of our own consciousness. So therefore, what we can say then is that when we pay attention to the chakras, what we're really paying attention to is that which is eternal biologically and cosmologically. We are paying attention to energies and intelligences that are immortal. And we are also starting to pay attention to the part of our consciousness, the part of our psyche that is timeless. And so therefore the chakra system is pointing to who we are at the cosmological level and in terms of our enlightened potential and how to activate it. So that's a quick overview of that particular term. But now let's look at this term, inner landscape. What does that mean? Well, the inner landscape is the inside of the body. And the inside of the body is what is perceived by the consciousness living inside the body. So therefore, the inside of the body is actually the inside of our mind. Okay. And another way that we can say that is that the inner landscape is where mind and matter meet. So therefore, we can define the classical systems of the chakras and as being what meditators discovered through deep body-based meditation, where they placed the attention inside this container of the universe for extended periods of time. And then they drew out this map and said, here's how the elements of the earth are inside the body. Here's how all of the deities of the human psyche are. And this is at the meeting of mind and matter, at the meeting of consciousness and body. And so this is very, very important to consider. And so really, this is a radical evolution in terms of human spiritual history. This started maybe about 1,500 years ago. And the premise of this completely changed the concepts of spirituality and religion, because what it tells us then is that enlightenment is possible, that we are inherently divine, and it is accomplished within the body. And all of these ideas were completely different than those of organized religion, which is, the body is sinful, and maybe if you're good, you can go to heaven. But the practices were saying the body is heaven. The body is the cosmos. The body is the place to do the work to recognize ourselves in all of this. So the inner landscape is therefore the dimension, the internal dimension, where we do this exploration and we discover and we develop our spiritual consciousness. And this is the main point that I hope you can take away from all of this, is that the chakra systems that we'll be looking at in some detail in just a minute here are really just depictions of what meditators have found looking inwardly. And we should do that ourselves. We should attempt to explore and understand this inner landscape at a very deep level, because it's not really what information comes to us, whether it's about herbs or whether it's about meditation. We should test everything ourselves and see what we find. But we have these teachings that can guide us. All right, now a big question: where are the chakras? And this, of course, is closely related to how many are there and what do they do and how do we work with them? But I want to point out historically that there has been no agreement on this. Now that's important to understand. Why has there been no agreement? Chakras are subtle, they are energetic, and they are also symbolic. And therefore, this discussion, this debate has been going on well over 1,000 years about do they exist or don't they exist? Where are they and what do they do? And many very interesting ideas have come out of this, such as, well, they're very subtle. And the reason we can't find them if we do surgery is because they're too subtle to see. They're made out of breath. Or the reason we can't see them in, if we dissect a corpse, if we do an autopsy, the reason that we don't have chakras in corpses is because they're made out of breath and they disappear at the time of death. There are all of these kind of explanations for this. But there's also really esoteric things that point to something even more profound. For example, one statement says the chakras are not in the body. The body is in the chakras. All right. Well, that's starting to sound a little bit like quantum physics here, but that's the magic of this interface between mind and body. Maybe that is where quantum physics is happening. So in this interface between mind and matter, it is said that there is this entire network of this subtle energy, subtle nervous system. And that's where the chakras are. So don't be too concerned about, the details here. There will be answers. I'll give various answers as we go. But it's important to step back and not try to interpret things literally when it comes to the teachings of the chakras. What we want to do is take the teachings of the chakras as a starting point for our own internal exploration, okay? And the most important thing to accomplish here is to develop the ability to bring the attention into the container of the universe and hold it there, or move it around inside there, or to expand it, or to bring it down to a small point, to synchronize it with the breath. This is all that these practices are about. They're just teaching us how to use our mind to perceive the nature of reality. That's all, like all meditation practices. All right, so now let's talk about the term the deities and the cosmological powers. I've given you a little introduction to this, but in all of the classical lineages, the Hindu, Buddhist, and the Taoist yogas, the chakras are depicted as mandalas. And in those mandalas, there are deities or entire families of deities. And we'll look at a few of these images here in a minute. But what do these deities have to do with the chakras? These have many meanings. And again, this is why it's important not to take any one system too literally, is because there's so many systems that have so many different representations. And what they're telling us basically is, again, about the nature of the body. And the short introduction is that the deities represent our own potential for enlightenment. They represent our own potential for realizing our own divinity. So this is a very profound message. Anytime you see an image, a classical image, where the body is full of deities, the message is, you're full of deities. You are full of divine manifestations of consciousness and the intelligence of nature. And so therefore, when we start to think about this, we start to realize that, oh, this is an inherent potential within myself, to realize that everything that's happening in the body is cosmological intelligence, and everything that's happening in my mind is potential enlightened activity. Then it starts to change our sense of self. It starts to change our sense of who we are. And we start to understand these practices. These practices, the chakra practices, Tantra in general, which includes Tantra in Tibetan, Buddhist, and Taoist lineages, the fundamental radical evolutionary step was the teaching that we could recognize our own divinity, okay? That we are divinity waiting to discover itself in matter, in the body. All right, now let's talk about where did all this come from, because this is extremely important, or actually I should say, why is it so important? Where did it come from, and why is it important to understand where it came from? Now, as I have mentioned, very little information has actually reached us. It's starting to now, but for every book of traditional Chinese medicine or Qigong or Ayurveda, for every book that's been translated or written in the last 10, 20 years, there's thousands of root texts that have not been translated yet. So what we have received is actually a minuscule, tiny fraction of what these lineages contain. These lineages contain vast amounts, vast repositories of incredible teachings. But they're starting to come to us, and this is really wonderful. Now, the more we study the systems from different perspectives, from different cultures, from different lineages, and looking at them through different lenses, the more we see that the chakras give us more teachings than we realize. And they're more profound than we realize. And they have more uses than we realize. And there's more practices than we realize. And the more we know about these origins, the more we understand their cultures, the more we understand where they come from, their history, what they were used for, the more we learn about ourselves. Because the chakra system is really a system, many systems, that are depictions of who we are. These are depictions that came from people's meditative experiences, deep meditative experiences. And so therefore there's great value in considering these things. Now, basically, there are three systems. Now we get into the importance of studying the origins, because if we understand where they came from, then we can understand what different people in different times did with them and what they thought about them, and that can help us tremendously. So there are three main historical sources of the chakra systems. The first is contemporary. Now, a lot of people might find it surprising that almost everything that is known in contemporary culture here in the West is fairly recent. Even just in the last few years, people have been inventing all kinds of new chakras and saying all kinds of things about them. But this phase actually goes back to the 1800s. And this is important to look at. So this will be the first phase, is what we could call New Age. And New Age actually goes back to the late 1800s. Right? The second phase would be what we could call the classical lineages of Hindu, Buddhist, and Taoist yogas and tantras, the classical lineages. And that's the majority of information that is in the Asian traditions. But then we can also add one more category, and that is the origins. The people who wrote the root texts, the people who did the fundamental practices and gained these realizations and then wrote the root text that became the classical traditions throughout Asia. So let's look first at the New Age, just very briefly here. The New Age is mostly what we come across now. And this originated in the late 1800s and the early 1900s from the Theosophy movement, the Theosophists. Okay, now the Theosophists were influenced by the arrival of yoga from India, and this would be the Hindu yoga that came with people like Paramahansa Yogananda, who was much later actually, but a lot of the original teachers who started bringing yoga to the West brought early versions that were encountered, and some Americans and Europeans got very interested in this and started translating some of the concepts. And so what we find then is that the first introduction to the chakra system that we have now, the 7 chakras, actually came to the West in the 1880s. All right. And that's also when there was an attempt to correlate them with physical structures. Now, that had not been done before, okay? Because we now have new information medically. So that's how this started to enter into our culture, and some of these original texts started to get translated. And we have one thing here that I want to show you. Some of you may have seen this image a long time ago, or maybe recently. One of the first texts that actually depicted this came out in 1927, called The Chakras, by one of the theosophists, Charles Leadbeater, right? Let me show you where a lot of people first encountered the chakras. Remember that image? Have you seen this? All right, well, this is where we get this association with the chakras and the nervous system. This was not part of the classical tradition at all. Somewhat aligned, but not really. And this is where it started to move from the nervous system and eventually into the endocrine system. So that's where this came from, is in the early assimilation from the traditional sources into the West, and people trying to explain it, trying to say, well, how can we actually show that this is true? Now, since that time, a lot of people have added to this discussion. And so what we could say is that it's been kind of a unintentional collaboration from a lot of people. For example, Esalen Institute helped to develop the chakra system, and Joseph Campbell and Barbara Brennan and Carl Jung, and a lot of these people in the last 100 years who really brought out and developed spirituality in the West were drawing on a lot of these ideas. Rudolf Steiner contributed, and Carolyn Mace contributed. So we have these major names that have kind of contributed to this river of knowledge. But this river of knowledge really only goes back to the late 1800s. And now, to answer many, many questions, all right, many things that are now associated with chakras, like, you know, astrological signs and gemstones and homeopathic remedies and tarot cards and all these kind of things. Many of these things have been added very, very recently. All right, so that's our first phase. But now let's go back in time and let's start looking at, well, what were these traditions before they got interpreted by the Theosophists and Carl Jung and people like that. And this is the Hindu, Buddhist, and Taoist yogas for the last 1,000 years. And this is where we find the source of most of the iconography, the depictions of the yogis with the chakras inside the body. And what we can say is that this is a vast repository of spiritual history, because it's not just that it's over 1,000 years long, and it's not just that it's three major world religions and spiritual lineages. It's also that there are all these subcategories based on all these different lineages and schools of thought. Taoism had hundreds of sub lineages, okay? It had maybe 6 or 10 primary schools, but that's just Taoism. And so what we find then, hundreds of little rivers of history that are contributing to this. But we can divide it into two main categories. And that is those teachings and practices that were popularized and publicly known, and those that were more secret. All right. And so we can take a look at a few images here to see what are some things from these traditions. All right. Microcosmic orbit from Qigong. Neigong, actually, internal alchemy, all right? This is showing chakras. This is showing the process of internal transformation of consciousness by working with the breath and the mind and the attention in the inner landscape. So this is one that was very well known all over China. All right, it's a type of tantric yoga also. And then we have classical depictions like this. This is Hindu. I'm sorry, this is Buddhist Tantra, all right? And then we find also that there's a lot of correlation between the chakra systems and medicine, all right? Now, this is not exactly about the chakras, but it's based on the concept of a central channel and solar and lunar pathways, which basically correlate with the autonomic nervous system. And so these are a few things that were very well known. Okay, these were exoteric, external. But then we have the esoteric lineages. These are the things that were more secret. These are yogis practicing a particular type of dzogchen yoga in Tibet. And these lineages were not well known. They were known by the culture because there were all these yogis practicing, but this was in a particular context. And it's not that these teachings were so secret, it's that these teachings were in a container. They were in a context where people were given these instructions as part of a much longer intensive training. And so here we see Tummo. This is a unique Himalayan type of yoga practice. This is what Milarepa practiced. This is what Kalu Rinpoche was practicing. This is the inner fire. And then we see this Taoist image. This is one of the oldest depictions. And I will tell you a bit more about what this is in just a couple of minutes. But this goes way back. And this takes us, these three images take us to the third category historically, which is the origins. So this image is one of the origin images of the chakra system in Taoism. This is coming from the root of Tibetan Buddhist chakra practice, and this is a bigger container of Tibetan yogas. All right, so now we have established the three main time frames here. And the earliest root sources are very important to consider because that's where we find the deepest, most complex descriptions of the inner landscape. And that's completely different than what we have now. And so what we want to do here is deepen our understanding of what the chakras are by doing some cross-cultural comparison. So why is it important to know these different systems and what are some of the main differences? One of the most important reasons I think we should do this exercise and look at the historical background is because the classical systems had a very clearly defined spiritual goal. All right, there's a reason to do this. There's a reason to do these practices. And it is not about the chakras. The chakras were the method. They weren't the goal, okay? And so what we can say is that if we compare these systems, we find very different purposes. And that answers a lot of questions also. Now let's look at the modern system. And the modern system is linked to the endocrine system. It's linked to the nervous system. And the chakras are very closely associated with various blockages in our psychology or our emotional and mental states. And therefore, we could say that the modern system of the last 100 years is really a system of biopsychology. It's a system of mind and body medicine is what it is. It's pointing to how the mind and body relate. And therefore, we find these different statements that are made. For example, the say, pick anything, forehead, all right? So the depictions that we see here or the descriptions of the chakras are frequently put in these emotional or psychological terms. And so they say sixth chakra, when it's open, that you are creative, okay? That you are psychic, that you are receptive, or the opposite. If your sixth chakra is closed or blocked, then you are delusional or you're self-sabotaging. All right, now that's psychology, all right? And it's psychology associated with the endocrine systems and the endocrine glands and psychology of the nervous system. And there's validity to this, but that gives us a completely different purpose than what that yogi was doing generating inner heat, for example. Now, here's a really interesting observation that we could consider, and that is that when we use the modern system of biopsychology and we associate these different mental and emotional states with the different parts of the body, what we find, if we bring in our knowledge now of neurology and endocrinology, what we find is that most of these emotional and psychological correlations aren't actually associated with the nervous system plexi, okay, these locations of the chakras, and they're not associated with the endocrine system very directly. What they're actually associated with is the regions of the brain, right? So fear, what would you think of? Fear, first chakra, that's what most people associate, fear. They say, well, fear's in the first chakra. Well, okay, but actually fear is generated from the amygdala, all right? That's the fear center in the brain. And then we think about heart chakra, loving and compassionate, empathy, and these kind of qualities. And we think about, okay, the heart. And that's an age-old association, and that has validity. But if we look at it from modern neurology and psychology, we find that the qualities of the heart chakra are actually located in the frontal lobe of the brain. And when people go through neurodegenerative conditions and the frontal lobe is affected through an injury or through medications or degeneration, the qualities of the heart chakra begin to decline, okay? So if we look at it that way, then what we see is a very interesting question. Maybe the chakras are actually like this holographic projection into the body from the brain, right? Maybe the things that are happening in the brain are being projected into these various locations in the body. And we know that that's true. We know that's happening. So for example, every emotion that we have spreads through the entire body. Every emotion is in every cell, but it is neurologically associated with these centers. Now, this concept is well known, both in modern science and in classical alchemy. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. The concept is called the homunculus, the little man, the homunculus. So let me show you a picture of a homunculus here, and this will give you a new concept of chakras altogether. Here is the homunculus, all right? So here is our brain, and here is how it is projecting into different parts of the body, all right? So it's possible then that the chakra system is actually like a type of, quantum physics that's happening from the inside of the brain, being externalized into the different parts of the body. That's what neurology tells us, but that's also what classical Taoist alchemy tells us. And I'll just leave this a little mystery here for now. All right. So this is a little scientific comparison here. But let's go back and say, well, why is this important? Why should we consider all of these things? And we've looked at the biopsychology side of it. Now let's take a look at some of the classical images, all right? And this is going to define our understanding of the purpose, okay, which is not biopsychology at all. That's what's important, is that classical systems were not concerned about biopsychology. And so here's a whole series, a quick series that shows us the inner landscape. And here we can zoom in a little bit. And what do we see? Not very well, but we can see deities. More deities. More deities. Our enlightened potential. More deities. More deities. There's Ganesh. More deities. It's telling us something about divinity. It's telling us something about our psyche. It's telling us something about the elements. It's telling us something about cosmology. There's Brahma in the third chakra. And so we see this over and over. Buddhas inside the body. Taras inside the body. Buddhas and Taras inside the body. Now, if we know that this iconography is telling us about our own divinity, then that changes the entire purpose of the chakras completely. It's teaching us that the body is the container of the macrocosm. And it's there right now. It's doing everything for us. And these deities are telling us that these are powers of nature, forces of nature, and powers of our psyche. So this is totally different. And let me give you a simple example. This is totally different than biopsychology. Let's just say fifth chakra. Let's do a quick comparison of these systems. Fifth chakra. What would modern biopsychology say? Well, positive qualities of your throat chakra. You are communicative, you are expressive, you are diplomatic, okay? Well, these are all qualities of contemporary throat chakra. Right? Or if it's negative, it's closed, then you like to gossip, okay? You're very critical. All right, these are psychological terms, but what do we find the main thing is with the throat chakra if we look at it through this different set of priorities, really different set of priorities? Well, enlightened speech. Okay, there's a little bit of crossover there with biopsychology, but in the tantras, what that means is that we actually speak as deities. All right, this is not about healing our psychology. This is achieving enlightenment so that our speech is enlightened speech. That's fundamentally different. So let's pause here and let's do a short meditation practice now that I've introduced a lot of different things. And then we will continue on. I hope that you are enjoying this. I hope that you are finding it interesting. Let's make ourselves comfortable and let's just metabolize all this information so far. It's a lot of information. All right, make yourselves comfortable, relax, close eyes, slow the breathing a little bit. We're going to hurry up and meditate here because we've still got so much to cover. Now, bring the attention to the body. That's the beginning of all of this. Many of you are familiar with body scanning. Just bring the attention to the body. But now see if you can find where the mind and the body intersect. This is a profound meditation just in itself. And keep in mind that our awareness of the body is actually happening inside our mind. But where? The mind is focused into the body, but the body is being experienced inside the mind. Now become aware that this experience of the body being inside the mind and the mind being inside the body is the inner landscape. This is the container, or as they say in the tantric traditions, this is the luminous tent. This is the prana body. This is the vajra body. This is the radiant body where mind and matter meet. See if you can feel that. And we won't feel it much doing this for 2 minutes. But if you do this consistently for 2 hours, you'll feel it. Now, bring the attention to the inside of the head, inside the skull, which in Taoism is called the cranial palace. Inside the skull, there are deities. Feel the inside of the skull, and now feel the spinal column as a hollow tube going down through a body of energy. So first step, we feel how the body is inside the mind and the mind is inside the body, the interface of mind and matter. Then we focus specifically on the space inside the cranium, the space inside the central channel, the spinal column. And now we imagine and feel all of the physiological activities going on all around this central channel. We feel the heart beating, and we recognize that it is being done for us by a cosmological intelligence and a biospheric intelligence that created us. We recognize that that intelligence has divine attributes and dimensions, and we recognize that that is part of our consciousness also. We observe the breathing. And we observe the breathing as being done for us because we can't control the breath very much. It's involuntary. The heart is involuntary. We feel the digestion. It is involuntary. We feel the hormonal balance. That is involuntary. We feel the immune system. That is involuntary. We feel the body as the container of biospheric physiological processes that are being done for us. And they're all linked to the central column and the brain. And all of these physiological processes can be depicted as deities, forces of nature inside of us. So see if you can hold that image for just a moment, that your body is a container of deities that represents the forces of nature, the biosphere, the intelligence of the cosmos, all the things that are being done for us all the time. Okay, take a deep breath. Now, what did we just do? Other than the fact that we did it in 3 minutes. We did one of the shortest tantric meditations in history. Well, we looked inside the body, we looked at where the mind and the body meet, and we did some visualization and some imagination inside the inner landscape, and we looked at the 2 major aspects of the central nervous system, and that started to develop a little bit of inner focus, sensation of how the body's made of intelligence of the universe. And so now, what if we just did that a lot and started to include herbs and aromatics to make it even deeper? Well, if we went to 30 minutes, it'd get a lot deeper. But then just think, what happens when you do this for 30 days? All right, that's another major difference, is that we're not practicing anywhere near the capacity of what those old meditators were doing. So now let's go back and let's take a look here. And we'll go back to that image of the Taoist. And that image is from the supernatant clarity, great cavern, perfected scripture, the Shangjing Dadong Zenjing, right? Forgive my Chinese pronunciation. And that's this meditator here. All right. Now, the reason I wanted to show you these images again, look at this image and look at this yogi who is in a state of deep bliss, blissful sensations of warmth and sustained attention. You know, the reason that I wanted to go back and touch on these is just a quick cultural comparison. Because in my mind, this is the source of the inspiration, is to know the depth of practice that was being done. And if we know the depth of practice that was being done, we can ask the question, what were they doing and what were their spiritual goals? And we can obviously see that their spiritual goals were not about psychology. They had a greater spiritual goal. Now, before I actually define this huge subject of the spiritual goal, I will answer the most common question that came in. So many people ask this, and that is, how many chakras are there? And people will say, well, I've heard there's 6, and I've heard there's 7. This person says there's 8, and now there's 12. And like I said, there's been a lot of discussion about this for a long time. But my answer to that is, when people ask, how many chakras are there? I would ask another question. I would say, well, how many do you need? Okay. And that's the basic difference here. Because if we look at those images, what we find is that those practitioners were going after something else. And that's the most important difference in the systems. And that is the contemporary system of biopsychology is really about healing. It's about therapeutics. It's about wellness in this time and place. But the old systems of the classical chakras were really about something else. They wanted enlightenment. They wanted transcendence. They wanted moksha, emancipation from bondage to the senses. They wanted God realization. They wanted to obtain the unsurpassed enlightenment, which liberates the psycho-spiritual components into the body of light. There's another definition. They wanted to cross to the far shore, gone beyond, as they said about the Buddha. They wanted self-realization. They wanted satori. They wanted awakening, all right? They wanted transcendence because in the past, up until fairly recently, people were generally surrounded constantly by reminders of impermanence, all right? So that is the primary difference. And so we ask, well, how many chakras do we need? And we can go back and we can look at the different images that I have told you, and like that Tumo Yogi, all right? We'll go ahead and put this on here. Go back. And in this case, this yogi, in order to achieve this state of very blissful, sustained concentration, basically only needs one chakra at the lower end of the central channel, his breath visualization of fire to bring the fire into the brain and in the upper chakra, melt the nectar drops that then cascade back down and feed the fire. So in this system, there's only two chakras that are needed, the base of the sushumna and the top of the sushumna. In this system, this is the invocation of the celestial deities, inviting them into the cranial palace. This is linking to constellations. This is linking to intelligence of the stars, specifically the Big Dipper. And so therefore, only one chakra is necessary here, which is the crown chakra. Okay. So that is the answer. How many chakras are there? How many do we need to do a practice that will help us go deeply into meditation? In Taoism, the three Dantian, the elixir fields, the lower, middle, and upper, three fields are necessary. In much of Tibetan Buddhism, Om, Ah, Hum, white letter Om in the center of the head, red letter Ah in the throat, blue letter Hum in the heart. Okay, that's what's necessary to transform ourselves into deities. All right. And so let's take a look at that very briefly. Excuse me. Then we're going to pause. Here's blue Hum. Let's do this for just a moment. Let's do this. Relax yourself again. And now we're borrowing from cultures, but we don't need to borrow from cultures. We can understand the essence of it. So relax, sit comfortably. And now place your thumb on the opposite artery at the wrist so you can feel the heartbeat. Close eyes and look into the heart. But feel the heart pulsating at the wrist. Now, just paying attention to your heartbeat is activating the prana of the heart chakra. Be completely present with your heart. Your attention is prana. You are sending your own heart prana. The prana of your attention is going to the prana of the heart. Now, let's bring in a little visualization. Be aware that there is a triangle from your brain, paying attention to the pulse, paying attention to the heart. That's a triangle of attention. You are being present with yourself. Presence is love. You are giving yourself attention, self-nourishment. But now, inside the heart, visualize that there is a moon disk. It's a full moon, but it's lying flat. It's cool. It's quiet. And then appearing on this moon disk is this blue syllable that contains so much information in concentrated form. And this has a vibration, and it is going Hum, Hum, Hum. It's vibrating very slowly and peacefully. And you can see this syllable, seed syllable, this bija syllable. And it's a mantra. It's a sound of Hum, Hum, and it's vibrating in the heart, and you are focused inwardly with your attention listening to the heartbeat, and it's blue and it's radiating light. Now, that is activating a flower because the energy of the heart center is responding to your attention. And you're adding to that with a visualization, and you're adding to that with a mantra. And what is it opening up to? It's opening up to the intelligence of the universe that is pulsating the heart. And it is opening up to our deepest level of potential enlightened Buddha nature. And that's why just doing something simple like this, if we understand the principle, we are starting to look at the process of opening a chakra, sending energy to it, being present with it, understanding the essence of what it is that we're doing. And we can understand that inside of us, there is this consciousness beyond time and space. All right, take a deep breath and stretch. Okay. So, what did we just do? We practiced synesthesia. Okay. Synesthesia is the merging together of our senses. Synesthesia, merging together of our senses. So first of all, we had a tactile sense of actually listening to the heartbeat. Then we were aware, we had a mental sense of concentration, okay, paying attention to ourselves, being aware of the prana of attention. Then we included visualization. That's the visual sense, which is happening inside the brain with the exact same circuitry that we're using right now with our eyes externally. We did it internally, visualization. And so that adds another layer of practice. And then we imagined that it had a sound. So this is using all of our senses for meditation. And that's Tantra, is transforming our senses into enlightened activity, using our senses to discover our enlightened nature. Now we could add other things. You know, we could breathe sandalwood oil at that time. That would help with this. We could drink some rose petal tea, and that would also help with this. All right, so there's all kinds of ways that we could develop this kind of practice further. But the most important thing is that we started to work inside the inner landscape, and we started to use some of these simple methods. And what were we really doing? Okay, we weren't worrying so much about psychology, because this is healing. You see, this is the other part of this, is that if we're going for enlightenment, all of the psychological stuff is going to get resolved, but not necessarily the other way around. You see, we could spend our whole life working on our psychology and not become, you know, liberated, not become illuminated, not reach the final goal of transcendence. We should put all of this into perspective. And I think this is one of the most important things that these traditions are telling us. Let's raise the standards for our spiritual goals, okay? So that's one of the most important things to think about here, is not just that we are doing these practices, which are totally the same as what was being done. It's just that now we're only starting to translate the essence of these, and we're not doing them very deeply. But, you know, when these meditators were doing these practices very deeply, they were doing exactly the same thing. They were using the prana of their attention. They were using synesthesia. They were using visualization. They were using mantra. They were using the inner landscape. In other words, what they were doing to achieve enlightenment is what we have to work with. They were using body and mind and focus. And we have those tools. Now let's do one more thing here, one question here before we switch over, because I'm going a little long, as I tend to do, but I'll do one more short question here. And this is important. And the question is, do we have to know about chakras to reach spiritual goals? What about all these other people throughout history who never heard of chakras? All right. And this is an important question to consider for several reasons, because chakras are connected primarily to Asian spiritual lineages. All right. But every culture has produced enlightened people. Every culture has produced holy people in different ways. So another way that we could ask this question is, which comes first, the chakra activation or the alteration in consciousness? All right, now that's important to consider. And one of the main reasons, one of the main contexts that I have in my clinical consultations with people is because many people are encountering now entheogens. And this raises a very interesting question about how do altered states of consciousness affect our chakras? Okay, and can we get into those states of consciousness by working with the chakras instead? Well, let me show you the last of the images here, and then we'll pause. All right, here's an image. This is an image of a crown chakra. In the Buddhist tradition, it's called an Ushnisha. It represents enlightenment. But we find this kind of imagery all over. Here's a halo. Okay. So we could spend a long time studying just the iconography of the crown chakra from different cultures. But what I wanted to point out here is that neither one of these enlightened holy people that I just showed you, Buddha or Christ, are known to have practiced or taught the chakra system. And yet we could say that they are probably two of the most important historical figures who represent the opening of the crown chakra and the heart chakras. All right. So therefore, we can take this information and we can translate it and apply it. The key to go all the way back to the beginning is prana, of attention. We do not need to know about the chakras, but the more we know, the more we can use our attention creatively. We do not have to follow specific systems, but the more we understand the essence of those systems, the more we will be able to do the practices using the same resources. What are the resources? What are the tools that we have that these old meditators used? They had a body. We have a body. They have a mind. We have a mind. They focused their mind. We can focus our mind. They focused their mind on the inner landscape. We can focus our mind on the inner landscape. They had a breath. We can use our breath. They could visualize. We can visualize. They understood that the physiology of the body was the activity of cosmological intelligence, and they called it deities. We can understand that the activity of physiology is deities and cosmological intelligence. We can do all of this if we understand the essence of it, and we can do it with great respect and use the parts from these different traditions that really work for us. But we can also just make it very simple. And we can say, if we understand what the goal is, then we can go in and we can just start asking ourselves that question. What is the ultimate spiritual goal? How do we find it? We probably are going to find some very important things if we look in the inner landscape. All right, so now let's pause. And what I'm going to do here is a 2-minute commercial for my upcoming course. And I am going to actually show you now the course page. And we're going to just scan through very quickly the most important things. And then what we will do is I will come back to the descriptions of the classes. And I will use the descriptions of the classes to answer more questions, because many of the questions that have come in are actually addressed in the way the course description is written. And so we'll use the class page then as the course page as an opportunity for more teachings and discussion. And I hope that you have all been putting questions in. 2 questions in the Q&A file, but I have so many questions from previously that even if nobody asks anything now, I've got 75 questions from before. All right, let's take a look here real quickly at the course page. And thank you for bearing along with me. Don't go anywhere. We're going to get right back to our class. All right, so here we go. The illuminated chakras. Starting on August 10th, running for 10 weeks, 10 classes up until October 26th. It's going to be every Saturday from 10 to 1, 3 hours, 30 hours of material. And so this is substantially longer than the illuminated, than the healing chakras class that I did some time back, 7 hours. This is 30 hours. That's a major difference. This is also substantially longer than the 9 powers class that I did over at the Shift Network. That's the main difference, a lot more. And it is really just an ongoing documentation of my own studies and practice and what I'm learning and incorporating into my own mind stream, a step at a time. Awakening, so it's self-transformation by awakening the inner landscape of deity mandalas, mystic channels, and cosmological intelligence. I'm not going to spend time on this. You can look at it later. Here's my little invitation. Oh, this will answer several questions that came in about the relationship, the correlations between the Taoist Dantian, the 3 elixir fields of Taoist alchemy, lower, middle, and upper, where the essence is transformed in the lower into qi in the heart. And then qi is transformed into shen, and shen, spirit, then merges back into the Tao. That is exactly what I was talking about. What are we really going for? That's far beyond biopsychology. What they're talking about in the Taoist terms is using the body to discover our true immortality and to merge back into the Tao. So they weren't concerned about, opening the chakras. They were concerned about the Tao, enlightenment. And so Daisy and I had a wonderful conversation about this. So there, you can check that out. All right, so all these benefits, of course, are just from doing the practices, all right? We're not going to become like Milarepa. We're going to develop some degree of awareness of the inner landscape that maybe we didn't have before. And here is something that some of you might find important. This is information that's universally applicable for everybody. The more we do these kind of practices, the greater we become at healing. So if we understand the inner landscape, we understand Ayurveda better. If we understand the inner landscape, we understand yoga better. If we know the inner landscape, we become better acupuncturists. Okay. It's good for everyone, in other words. Oh, there's the tuition. 30 hours of interactive lessons. We're going to be using herbs and essential oils combined with these practices. We're going to be doing lecture, meditation, and discussion, all of them. Video recordings and downloadable audio. All right, now that's my little sales pitch. Thank you for bearing along. And so now I'm going to pause for just a moment and start again. And this time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start moving into our question and answer session. I see that some questions are coming, but I also have a long list of questions that were submitted. However, I would like to give you a quick overview of the modules. And as we go, I'll show you a couple of points that will answer some questions. That's what is next. So let's go here. So first, a quick scan. Week 1, we are going to be considering the prana body. We're going to be studying the prana body. That's the interface between mind and matter. That's where the body is inside the mind and the mind is inside the body. Okay, that's the inner landscape. Okay, then in that, we're going to be looking at the central channel, which is fundamental to knowing the chakras, working with them, and understanding this entire system. Then we're going to be transforming our self-identity. We're going to learn how to view ourselves as a container of deities and to recognize that the deities are inside of us as the powers of nature. Then we start our upward journey through the 7 major chakras. First, second, third, fourth, you saw that image. Fifth, you saw some Tibetan mantras already. 6th and 7th. There we go, 10 weeks. Now, let me pick a couple of topics out of here. This is for you to do at your own time, is to look at these in more detail. But what we're going to study is outlined here. Now, consider this. Lecture number 1, we're going to look at the prana body according to Vedanta system of the 5 koshas. Okay, so what happened? It just kicked me out of there. All right. So we're going to look at the prana body from the standpoint of the 5 koshas. The 5 bodies. Now, this is a Vedantic perspective, and it's very helpful also medically. And this is where we can really start to understand that there's an important reason for using different systems for different people at different times. Now, one of the common questions that has to do with the chakras is that people were saying, I feel that my chakra is closed. I feel that this chakra is injured, things like that. Now, the chakras are in the prana body. They're not, they may have a subtle effect on the physical body, but in the system of the 5 koshas, what we have is the food body of food and water, physical substance. Then we have the prana body of breath, the meridians, the subtle nervous system, the chakras. Then we have what's called the mind body, the mental body of our mental activities. And then we have the intellect body of higher cognitive functions. And then we have the bliss body of deep dreamless sleep. Now, if we correlate the chakras with these systems, what we find, that answers a lot of questions about these problems with the chakras. So a basic principle here of healing is don't look too far into things that are too subtle when you have more obvious kinds of things that are a starting point. I'll elaborate on that in just a minute. There's several questions that I want to review that are about this. But we're going to understand the prana body according to Chinese medicine and Taoist alchemy and Ayurvedic medicine and yoga. That's a lot. We're going to end up, after 3 hours of study and practice and discussion, we're going to end up with a lot of understanding about what the prana body is and is not. And then in tantric meditation, interface of mind and matter, container of the chakras, benefits. Why should we do this? There's all kinds of benefits. Relationship between the breath, so forth. Okay. Now, before I go on too far with this, I'm going to pause again. And I wanted to now touch on some of the questions that came in. All right. Thank you again for this. This is a very extensive list of really excellent questions. So I'll just go through a few of these. Some of these we can bounce back and forth with the class page. So here's a question which I have already answered, but I will answer it in a little bit more detail here. I understand that there are many cultural versions of the chakra system and the number and locations of the chakras, 4, 5, 7, and 10. Would you please speak on this? Yes, I did. And here's something new. Such as the earth seed and star seed chakras. Perhaps we are evolving and becoming more sensitized to additional areas of power in our fields. Maybe. Or maybe what's happening is that we're simply getting a lot of new ideas from people about what the chakras are. And so I have not actually encountered that term earth seed and star seed chakras. But I have encountered what could probably be the classical ancient version of that. Okay. So when we looked at the images, the classical images of the chakras, we saw many different versions of the first chakra, the root chakra, with Ganesh. And that's pointing to information that's telling us that the earth element is in the first chakra. Well, what does that mean? We can correlate that actually with Ayurvedic medicine. And we can say that the first chakra has a lot to do with our bowel movements, letting the waste of food go back to the earth. And if we take this idea that one chakra represents a lot of different things, and we look at it from all these different perspectives, then we see that a chakra is actually a mandala of meanings from different cultures and different times. And we can include in that mandala science and anatomy and physiology and Ayurvedic and Chinese medicine. And therefore, we can see that there are old versions of what I imagine is meant by earth seed chakra. But I don't know the exact way that this term is being used. But I imagine that it probably has to do with the connection of the body to the earth. And that's what the first chakra represents. Now let's look at the second term, star seed. Now this one I am familiar with, and I actually described it to you. I'm not familiar with that term. What I am familiar with is the invitation of the celestial deities from the Big Dipper into the cranial palace. And I showed you that image. Okay, star seed. Well, that is part of classical Neigong, Taoist alchemy, where we circulate the qi through the earth and the heavens and the body. So I imagine that we could find correlations then between these terms and classical definitions. All right. Here is a fundamental question that will give us a chance to define the purpose of the chakra system further. In your experience, does chakra energy move upward? For example, can balancing or augmenting a lower chakra benefit chakras higher up, or are their flows discrete? Well, there's a lot of answers to this. Now, one thing that we do find that is universal is that the chakra system represents a journey. And if we look at the symbology of what is inside the body and the symbology of how the chakras are organized, we actually see that the body is a representation of the cosmos. And we see that the body is moving from the earth elementally towards space. And that's a metaphor also for the spiritual journey. The spiritual journey is, well, first of all, incarnation. Space becomes matter. In other words, consciousness is space. The space element is consciousness. The mind stream is space that is moving. And so the mind incarnates into matter, and that is how we got here. And we are being held here by gravity, but not just physical gravity of the earth. We are also being held here by karmic gravity. And we're also being held here by a kind of gravitational pull of our mental habits that are associated with the body, you see. And so this is what the entire spiritual journey back out of matter is all about. The metaphor is, here we are, we incarnated, and now we're in this body, which is matter, and we are under the influence of gravity, and we're also under the influence of our karmas, and we're also under the influence of our thought processes, which keep us bound in matter. And being bound in matter means that we're also identified with the body, and it also means that we suffer because of the body, and it also means that we are bound in space and time. And so the chakra system then is a metaphor of how do we get out of this, okay? And that is why there is this universal shared concept that the energy moves upwards, all right? But that's not just an automatic given. This is something we have to do. And here is a very important point about the chakras. I think that you may have already considered the implications of what I said about bringing the attention into the inner landscape. One of the implications is, and this is clearly stated in the traditional classical methods, one of the implications is the chakras don't exist until we create them with our attention. We create them inside this prana body. And we are therefore creating a new body. And that is the Taoist image of the homunculus that I showed you. We go into the inner landscape and we create a new body. And in that new body, we have the capacity to transform our consciousness. So the inner landscape is the container of inner alchemy. All right. Now, what that tells us is that, yes, there is this metaphoric journey upward, away from the earth, back to spirit. But just like my question, how many chakras do we need? There's a very closely related question of what do we want to do with our chakras? And the definition here is that the inner landscape The container, the prana body, is where we do the work. And therefore, we use the chakras as locations for doing certain practices. Now, we did a very short practice of listening to the heartbeat and bringing our attention to the heart and imagining a moon disk and then imagining the seed syllable hum. And this is a fundamental practice in Tibetan Buddhism for activating deities. And out of that hum manifests Tara, manifests Medicine Buddha, manifests this great variety of deities. And those deities are sitting on that moon disk inside of our heart, depending on which practice we're doing. And so the Medicine Buddha might be sitting on that moon disk. But then inside the heart of the Medicine Buddha, there is the mantra going around inside his heart, you see. And so we keep going in, and it starts to look like quantum physics. And we start going more and more inward and doing more and more layers of synesthesia, and the mind develops, the brain develops from doing this. And at the same time, we are doing it in the container of the body in a specific location. And that location has great meaning. And so if we are doing this in the heart, because it's in the heart, and because the deity is in the heart, and because our attention is in the heart, it automatically has certain powers. It automatically has certain qualities. It automatically has certain energies. And it makes it very easy to meditate on compassion and loving kindness if you have a deity in your heart, you see. But if we look at the Taoist who is inviting the celestial deities to enter in through his crown chakra into the cranial palace, then we see a completely different type of practice. But again, it's not necessarily which way does the energy move. It's what are we using the body to do, okay? So that's the key. It's not necessarily that we're always trying to move up and away and get away from the body, because that's very problematic also. What we're really trying to do is learn how to recognize our own consciousness. And so therefore, the chakra system is this metaphor. Yes, it does move upward. And for the most part, the universal movement of energy in the chakra system is upward. But what does that mean? It means that with the three dantians, for example, the lower dantian has to do with the earth. And we will look at images, actually, of the inner landscape drawings from Taoism in class number 1 as part of the prana body. We're going to look at that inner landscape, and we're going to see the same thing that came out of China as was in India and in Tibet. And they're all saying in that part of the body is earth. There's a field of earth. There's a farm of earth. And there's water flowing through that. Okay, now what does that mean? That means nutrients, food body. It means reproductive fluids. It means sexual power. It means our karmic connection to the earth through attachment and love and bonding and family and reproduction. And therefore, for the yogis and yoginis who were done with that, who wanted to return to the Tao, that part of the body was used to transform earth and water into chi. And that was done using the third chakra. So we see this upward movement through fire. Water is transformed into steam, and that gathers in the heart as chi. And then in the heart, the vitality of chi is transformed into Shen, spirit. And then Shen rises to the cranial palace and out through the mystic aperture of the 7th chakra. And as they describe the accomplishment, we ascend to heaven in broad daylight. And that, of course, is a metaphor, meaning that we have discovered that we are spirit within matter. All right, let me switch over here. take a look. Some good questions, just a few to add to the long list. When we are able to bring forth the gods and goddesses in waking reality, does this indicate transformational achievement? Well, it sounds like it, but I'm not exactly sure what you mean by bring forth the gods and goddesses into waking reality. Now, do you mean that you can look around and you see the sun as Surya, the sun god? Okay. Does it mean that you look around at the natural environment and you see the mandala of the medicine Buddha, and everything in the forest there is part of the medicine Buddha's pharmacy? Is that what you mean? If that is what you mean, if you mean that in your consciousness you are seeing the presence of God all around you in waking reality, I would say yes, absolutely. That is a transformational experience, achievement. Absolutely. Now, here is a point that I make in my meditation sangha. We meet a couple of times a month to practice. And I have made a distinction between experiences and insights and accomplishments. All right. And this is important to consider when it comes to a lot of things that people are interested in with chakras, because many things that are being done now that are connected to the chakras are actually very transient experiences. Okay. And so what is being done with certain kinds of breathing exercises or yoga, visualization, any of the modern methods, they give experiences, and this is important. But, excuse me, it's not just chakra related. It's also, this is what happens with entheogens. People have experiences. And this is what happens with even longer retreats of Vipassana, 10 days. They have experiences. But experiences come and go, okay? And experiences don't necessarily become actual realizations, actual insights that are deeper levels of spiritual growth. Experiences are experiences, and they can lead to insights and realizations, but not necessarily. Insights and realizations, on the other hand, can also come and go, okay? And so therefore, I place the higher priority on the actual accomplishments, right? And what I mean by accomplishments is that we have actually changed something. We have actually done something. Now, accomplishments are also measured in these classical systems. Like that's what Qigong means, the word gong. It means to do something repetitiously, okay? And the minimal number to qualify for Qigong is like 100. You do something, you do this movement series 100 times, and that constitutes one gong. Or you do it for 100 days, that's one gong, right? That's where we start to get accomplishments, all right? And we accomplish this sequence. Or in Tibetan Buddhism, they're very big on numbers, right? So you need to do 100,000 prostrations, then you have accomplished something, right? So that's part of this. But that's a beautiful question. And my answer would be that if you are able to bring forth the gods and goddesses into waking reality, that is a transformational achievement. My question would be, how are you doing this? This would be something to discuss in a class. What does that mean? What is your experience of this? And maybe even more intriguing, can you help others do this? Can you help others to see the presence of God, to see the gods and goddesses all around us? All right. Okay, so let me go back. We have time for a few more of these questions. And thank you for so many things in the chat. Wonderful. Here is another question. Now, this is a different type of question, but it takes us back to some important principles. And the reason that I am bringing this out is because a couple of people have actually asked me this recently and in consultations. And the question is, some of those in the New Age healing community believe the chakras to be a control system that gives access to outside entities. There are people who help to remove the chakras for that reason. Where do you think this theory originates, and could there be any validity to it? Good question. Now, where does it originate? How long have humans been superstitious? How long have humans been afraid of the evil eye? How long have shamans been removing negative energies from people? All right, that goes back throughout all human history, really. And this is a very important subject when it comes to diagnosis and treatment, because many times people will use this model to explain illness. Many times people will use this model to explain psychological issues, mental health issues. And this is still very prevalent, actually. This concept of the chakras is kind of, a new age evolution of it, and taking your chakras out. Well, I think now that we know about the background of the chakra history and that we're actually using them to transform our consciousness back into cosmological intelligence, I don't think that we can agree that the chakras can be removed. Okay. However, there is a process that is very important. And that is that in shamanic cultures, healing is a community-based process. Healing is a family-based process. All right. This is crucial to understand. And there are many definitions and explanations of how we can be injured by other people's energies. That's a different question. What's important is that the person is not feeling well. And there's all these classical terms. Sisto, okay, that's fright and fear, for example, is a very big part of Central American shamanic culture, herbal medicine, sisto. A person had a fright, and ever since then, they have not slept well. They've been having nightmares, all right? Well, this can easily be attributed to another person did that to me. Now, what matters is the person doesn't feel well, and they go to the shaman, and the shaman is working either with just them, or they invite the whole family. And it's family therapy. And so then the shaman is doing these various things. They're actually very therapeutic physically, all right? Fumigation with aromatics, that will treat the brain, the central nervous system, for PTSD and help give better sleep. Drink this tea, dip the feathers in the flower infusion and sprinkle it on the patient. These things are physically medicines, but being done in the context also of you're inside the circle of your family. That's the healing of love and support. And having the shaman pray for you, that's powerful. All of these processes are healing, all right? Now, if it's as simple as that and the person is cured from that, then that's all we need to know, all right? But many times that's not enough. And so one of the things that we have to be very aware of is that sometimes people look for this level of diagnosis for conditions that are more obvious, that are right in front of them, you see. And that's what we have to be careful about, is we have to make sure that we don't think of cancer as just something that is somebody else's energy that came into our body. It's much more complicated than that. It's genetics, it's environment, it's toxicity, it's many, many things. And so we cannot oversimplify, but we can sometimes see that this level of diagnosis is profoundly healing, whether or not there was actually negative energies there. So the simple answer, the conclusion is, it's actually really hard to hurt somebody psychically. You know, most of what this entails is our own vulnerability and our own sensitivity. And that is why, you know, a ritual and a ceremony and prayers help us to get better. It makes us feel stronger. All right. I hope that was helpful. Well, there's so many questions. I just want to say thank you to everybody. Before we close, because I'm going to turn this back to Karen and Wendy for a few closing comments here, and also let you know about our discount code, your bonus for attending the class. But I just want to say to all of you, before we do one final closing and comment about the course, I just want to say thank you. And specifically, thank you for your interest in the subject. And I hope that I have been able to provide a little perspective on what this subject is. Because in my opinion, this subject is much more profound than we have yet to realize. Its purpose is much more profound. Its goals are much more profound. And these are goals that ordinary human beings have accomplished for over 1,000 years. And we have the same resources: body, mind, attention, breath, intelligence. We can accomplish these things also. And it's a fascinating study. It's very important for self-knowledge. There's so many ways that we can gain self-knowledge. And so thank you for the opportunity to elaborate on a little bit of these things that I have learned. All right. Hope to see many of you in the course. Take good care. I hope this was enjoyable and educational for you.